Hi, everybody. Welcome to Astrology Unplugged. I'm Rick DiClemente. Good to have all you guests with me tonight, especially good old Uncle Al coming to us tonight from Dallas, Texas. Nice to have you with us. Those of you joining from YouTube, we want to do a special welcome. And tonight, what's going on is I've decided to, tonight's show number 270. So I've decided to repeat now and then some of the early lessons in astrology because they took place a long time ago. So tonight we're going to do the houses, explain what they are, how they work, why they are meant to be what they're said to be. And also, I got a lot of new insights about the houses that I want to give to you tonight. And I want to talk about different ways of looking at the houses. It's one of the most confusing parts of astrology. So in astrology, if I may, okay, in astrology, let's get this right here. In astrology, you have 12 or 11, 12 planets, and the planets are in a sign. Each planet is in a sign, and it's also in a house. The houses always look something like this in the fact they're overlaid over top of the zodiac. Goes my voice already. So house number 1 is always in this area for everybody. Sometimes a little bit bigger, sometimes a little thinner, but it's in the area on your clock that's between 8 and 9 o'clock. Everybody's first house is in this area. Everybody's 10th house is near the top of the chart. Everybody's 4th house is near the bottom. Everybody's 7th house is over here. But the signs and the planets rotate within this cycle. This is always the same. Now, the ascendant is this line across. It goes across the first house to the 7th house. It's called the ascendant. Over here, it's called the descendant. The first house begins with the ascendant. The 7th house begins with the descendant. The first house is about me. The 7th house is about us, or me and my marriage, me and my partner. The nadir is the beginning of the 4th house. That's the bottom. The midheaven is at the top. This is the home. This is the career. So that's basically it. So when I talk about the 10 to 12 houses, I'm talking about that part of the chart. It has nothing to do with the signs. It has nothing to do with the planets. Okay? A planet is in a sign. It is also in a house. The house is determined by your birth time. So if you go back to this chart, if I don't care what time of year, if you are born around sunrise, your final chart, your sun is going to be in this area. So if you're Leo, the sun will be here with Leo. If you're born in the month of December and you're Capricorn and you're born at sunrise, the sun will be in this area in Capricorn. If you're born near if you're born near noon, if you're born near sunset, if you're born near midnight. So that's how the houses work. So what it is about is the planets are energies. The sign that they're in is the type of energy. You might say a planet is like a Chevy or a Ford. The sign it's in is like Ford, Chevy Camaro, Ford Mustang, Bonneville, the different types. The houses are, where does your planet get expressed into the world? So you have the planet in the sign, tells you the type of energy you have. The house it's in is, where does that planetary energy get expressed into your personality, into your family, into your job, into your mate, into your groups that you've involved in. So the houses have a lot to do with finessing a chart. So in actuality, in the basic astrology, you got a planet that's in a sign, It's in a house. There are different house systems, and house systems just merely mean the way those houses are divided. Big houses, little houses. I'm not going to complicate it now. It's a trigonometry issue, how those houses are divided in time and space. That's what houses are. Now, many astrologers use different house systems. I use Placidus, which is the one I've used all my life, and I've been very satisfactory with it. There are other house systems that work for some people, don't work for others. I've found many of them to be true, but I'm satisfied with Placidus. Now, so the house tells you where does that energy get expressed into what part of their life. Or if there's a struggle between two planets, they're going on in between two houses. Those two areas of your life might be in struggle. So when you talk about the basic houses of the zodiac, they have a very basic meaning, and these go way back. And the way these things are discovered is by discovery. They're discovered by people watching thousands and thousands of people with planets in this area. And it just seems to be, why does the third house pertain to your brothers and sisters? Well, we've watched enough people through the years, and when planets are in their third house, planets moving in their third house, something happens to their brother and their sister. So these houses have an inherent meaning, but I'm here to go a little bit past that tonight, because there are so many people who are stuck with houses, and they're stuck with the old definitions of houses. And it's a shame. And if you follow me tonight and you use the same logic that is used in the Exquisite Zodiac behind me, you'll start to understand better about the houses. Okay. So a person who has planets in the first house is kind of hard to understand because it's so basic. Anybody with planets in this house, this is the first house, and a planet is stronger in the beginning of the house. So a planet here is very powerful in the first house, and it weakens as it gets down through the rest of the first house. So a planet that's in the first house, say Mars, you are simply a lot like the planet Mars if Mars is in the first house. Just that simple. This is the house of the personality, the nearby surroundings, your early years of upbringing. It's the house of the body. So these houses have meanings, and they also have a higher meaning, you might want to say. And as you go through tonight, you'll start to understand a little bit how this works. So if you got Venus in the first, no wonder you're an artist. If you've got Pluto in the first, no wonder you're a psychologist. If you've got Saturn in the first, no wonder you're a bodybuilder. So the first house has a lot to do with your life. It has a lot to do with your karma and a lot to do with traumas in your life, etc. And before I forget it, let me remind you, big time, I'm going to remind you all week, don't miss next week. Next week, Deneen Joyner is going to be with us. She's got a whole preparation made, which I will be announcing through my newsletter and on Facebook. She's going to be talking about sexual karma. We initially started talking, and I was telling her about how so many people come to me and report rape and physical abuse, and it's just awful, and it's more prevalent than people think. And through the years, I've come down to understand that it's just about 1 out of 3 women, which is just awful. Now, I don't have the stats on it, but that's about what I experienced. And I hear that from other healers and light workers too. Now, she's going to be talking about trauma with sexual abuse, etc., all things related. She's an absolute expert in trauma and how to deal with it and how to get through it and how to get over it because she puts in the work. She's a workaholic. She does the focus. She uses all kind of techniques. She's just brilliant. She's been on the show before. You may look her up in my past records. Deneen Joyner. She will be on for 90 minutes next week. Okay, so in the first house, let me explain to you something now. You can already see how things get a little complicated. Let's say that you're a Cancer personality, and a Cancer is not known for being very aggressive, and they're not known for being pugilistic. Okay, well, if that Cancer, I don't care where Cancer is in the circle, if that Cancer has Mars in the first house, that Cancer will be pugilistic. They want to kind of fight. They might even enjoy fighting. They might be good at fighting. They might be bad at fighting. You're a lot like the planet in the first house. Any planet that's in your first house, draw it real big. Okay, it means it's got a huge impact on you. Now, if your first house is empty or other houses are empty, don't sweat it. It doesn't mean you don't have these qualities. It's not that simple. Now, let's move on to the second house. And as you get through the zodiac, you will start to see more and more how this works. The second house is always like the Taurus sign because it's similar to the sign of Taurus, just like the first house is similar to the sign of Aries. It's similar, but it's not the same. The second house has to do with your values, your money, your collections, the things you have, the things you own. Okay. Now, planets, when I notice planets going through this house, what happens is very clear to me. The second house has a lot to do with worth. We talked about worth and value. That's why so many Tauruses work in pawn shops, and they work as in museums, giving the validity to an object, assigning the worth to an object. But really what the second house is about, and this is what I'm getting into tonight, the second house is about your self-worth. When planets go through my clients, I'm watching planets go through to the second house of my clients, and maybe through different speeds or different nature of the planets that's going through. When the second house is being affected, it is people, they start to feel changes to their self-worth. They want to start feeling better about who they are. They want to get people off their back that have been on them about their self-worth. They want to get people off their back that have been negative towards them. So it's very, very common when the second house is activated, things are going on with the person's self-worth. I got to see what happened with all of our participants. They're there, then they're not there. So then there were three. So we'll have a little party. That's three guys. That's all right. So the second house has a lot to do with worth, etc. But there's not enough people that I have found that are understanding the true essence of that house. When that house is troubled, when that house is activated, there's trouble going on with the self-worth, feeling worthless, feeling worthwhile. That's okay, Eric. It's quite all right. It's just I went to the graphic and came back and there were three people. That's okay. Now, so the second house has a lot to do with that. When you see like Saturn going through there, you'll see people that are sick of it. They're sick of having their self-worth joked about or whatever, and they're just making sure that they get it strengthened. That's what Saturn does. On into the third house. in the third house. The third house is the mind house. It's the Gemini house. It's Gemini-like for all people. It has to do with mentality. It has to do with brothers and sisters, cars, local trips, local errands, things close to you, okay? Those are the things that just happens to rule. It's called rulership. It rules these things. When planets go through the third house, you see the person's mind changing. And I've had tremendous luck since I've adopted this new way of thinking. The third house is when they come along and they take your computer chip out and they look at it and they say, how in the hell did that get in there? And they toss it out and they put in a new one. That's the third house. So the people that have very busy third houses have very busy, strong minds. People that have conflicts in the third house have mental conflicts. They're not sure why, but they may have even been a slow learner, whatever. But the third house is the Gemini ability to learn things, to express things, learn to communicate. But at the communication level, since it's below in the bottom half of the zodiac, it's communications on a small level. The bottom half of the zodiac is local. The upper half of the zodiac is more global. That's all talked about in the book. So I see, for instance, people going through Saturn changes in the third house. And all of a sudden, this person who's kind of like whipty-wind and kind of whirly-gig and kind of crazy, whirly ideas, all of a sudden, this person starts to settle down. Saturn's influence in the third house makes them to want to start to see, boy, my mind is not really functioning very well for me. I've been too goofy with my mind. Saturn going through wants to make it more practical, etc. The person starts to apply themselves, maybe even taking courses to learn to apply their mind better as a mental tool. So the third house is the mind as a machine, as a computer. That's it. Now, moving on, and it gets harder and harder. You made me do it, Al, so what can I say? Fourth house. There's a big house for Uncle Al. Fourth house, Uncle Al's very fourth house-like, which is family. The fourth house is the bottom. It is the Cancer house. When planets are in the fourth house, it has to do with so many things. The family, the mom, the grandma, the meals that you eat, the traditions that you have, the houses you have, the property, the wills, the testaments, everything having to do with you being anchored in that certain property. The fourth house is the emotional house. It's very, very emotional because it's like the fourth sign, Cancer. So the fourth house, when changes go on in that house, people are changing emotionally. They're either getting more defensive emotionally, or they're getting people off their back and saying, this is how I feel, just deal with it. Quit telling me, making fun of me how emotional I am all the time. You just deal with it. So when strong planets come through, like Pluto or Saturn come through the fourth house, you start to see people get a little uppity because they're getting defensive of that area. Okay? It depends very much on the nature of the planet that's coming through, and it depends on what house is going through also. So it can be complex. The fourth house is very, very common. When Saturn comes into the fourth house at the bottom, it's unbelievably common how many people have to quit their job in Los Angeles and fly across to South Carolina and take care of their dying mom and dad for 5-6 years. It's a karmic house. It has to do with closure, and it's very, very common that Saturn gets in that house and you have no choice. You just got to quit what you're doing and go take care of mama. It's just that simple. Grandma, whatever. So the fourth house is a very karmic place. has a lot to do with your early upbringing. And your early upbringing in your life is major symbolized by the fourth house and the first house. The fourth and the first have a lot to do with early trauma. When I'm looking and studying a person for early trauma, I'm looking for indicators in the first and the fourth. The fourth is very delicate. When you have a lot of planets there, people don't want to leave. I don't care how adventurous they are, how Aries they are, how Aquarian they are, they just want to stay home. They just want to stay home where it's safe. They want to stay home where it's safe. Where does that come from? Well, the crab is an animal that walks sideways. And where's it going? It's going underneath the rocks to hide so it's safe. That's what the crab does. Now, that can be really good, but after a while, the crab's got to come back out and it might not be so safe. So everything has a cost. So the fourth house is very delicate. If you have planets in that area, it can make you really sensitive. And I might be looking at a chart that doesn't have much sensitivity. It's got a bunch of Leo in it, a bunch of Aquarius in it, maybe a bunch of Aries in it. But if the planets end up in the fourth house, I don't even care what planets they are. If you got a lot of population in the fourth house, then you pick up emotional qualities, because that's what the fourth house is. Now, what you're going to start to notice as I get into this further and further, you're going to start to notice that the first house is similar to the seventh house, only the seventh is on top, first is on the bottom. The second house is similar to the eighth house, only one's on the bottom, one's on the top, etc., etc. So we're going to go all the way around the zodiac, and you'll start to see how the whole picture works out beautifully into what we call an exquisite zodiac, because it's exquisitely designed because of its own inner intelligence. It just has an inbred intelligence. Now, these houses have many other factors to them. They have many other possible manifestations. And that's why when you read a book about your planet in the fourth house, or you read a book about a planet in the third house, don't go crazy if you read something that doesn't sound real accurate to you, because sometimes it's close. If you twist it a little bit, it's more accurate. So houses can have many permutations, many archetypal manifestations. Okay, but I'm giving you the basics. The fifth house, I think, is very misunderstood. The fifth, being the sign similar to the fifth sign of Leo, is the house of your children. So if I'm studying about what's happening to your children, that's the first place I'm going to go look, is what's going on in your fifth house. Now, in astrology, that's really the main part of the fifth house, is enjoyment, entertainment, and children. But what the fifth house is really about is expressing yourself. Let's take a look and see why. Since the fifth house is very much like the fifth sign Leo, and since Leo is ruled by the sun, you see how it's also incestuous. You see that the sun is creative, and people with a lot of fifth house planets, or people with a lot of Leo planets, I don't care what's going on in the world, these people just want to create. They got to do their art. They got to do their music. They got to try out for another play. They just want to create. You've got to express yourself. That's what's so powerful about the fifth house, self-expression. So when you notice planets coming through the fourth house and a person is getting a little more guarded about protecting their feelings, well, the next thing that happens naturally is the planets go into the fifth house and the person starts to feel like they want to express it. Why do you express it? You express it because you want to test it. You express it because you want to test it and get some kudos and start to gather confidence. So that's what happens in the fifth house. So it is your children, but it's your children because they are your main creation. That's the reason. It's not karmic, it's their main creation. Now, we'll keep going around and around. We might even go around a circle twice till you really see how it all works. Now, the sixth house is really important. And one of the main reasons it's important, it's the last house of the first six. It's the last house before we come a they. This is about me. This is about we. Me and mine, us and ours. So the top half of the zodiac is about the collective. The bottom half is about the self. And the self is perfected in the final sign of the bottom, which is Virgo. And that's why Virgo in the sixth house, Virgo people are obsessed with one word, like Al here. Al's got Venus and Mars in Virgo. He's a double Scorpio, but he's got Venus and Mars in Virgo, and that means he fixes. People with a lot of Virgos fix. So Al takes that Scorpio in him and examines these huge super jets, and he examines what's wrong with him with tremendous faith put on his shoulders, and he goes in and fixes what's wrong. That's what Virgo is about fixing. Okay. And you got to watch them because they'll start fixing things that aren't even broken. And that's a whole new story with how Virgos work. So why is this fixing obsession so strong? Here's the reason. The reason the fixing is going on is the soul can sense that it's going to go meet people. This line right here is so critical. This is self. This is others. This is when you go meet others. So the Virgo has a natural sense. Do I look good? Are my clothes pressed? Do I have a nice haircut? Am I clean cut? Virgos are very intrigued and interested in looking good and looking sharp because of that sense that they're going to go meet people. Now, another thing is really intriguing, and watch this because you'll see how this works. Virgo, if you know the sign well at all, is the sign of all whining stops here. All whining stops here. And if you ever tried to whine to a Virgo, well, good luck, okay? So it looks back at the first five signs and it says to those five, quit whining. It's time for us to get back up, dust ourselves off, get back up on the saddle and get tough. And this is why this is the sign of being self-created. These are self-made people. They really admire that about people. So the first sign is all about the self, and it can end up being a little bit of a whiner if you're not careful because it's so infant-like. The second sign, Taurus, it can end up whining too because it's so obsessed with all the things it has. Well, what about my stuff? Did you take my stuff? I didn't give you my stuff. Where's my stuff? And the Virgos can't stand any of this stuff. The Gemini, there's nobody in the zodiac that is more bored more easily than Gemini. I'm bored. I'm bored. Nothing to do. What am I going to do? Okay. Cancer. There's no sign in the zodiac in general that's more tender, that's more sensitive, maybe even hypersensitive. And they look, you insulted me, and look, you hurt my feelings. Well, these things are all very normal emotations, you may say. But this is why Virgo's got such a heavy job in that sixth position. And finally, in the fifth position, if you ever want to see a Leo whine, just disrespect them once. show them disrespect, and you'll see them whine because they just lose their minds if they're disrespected. But it's all understandable. It's all part of the growing process. And when you get to that sixth stage, the soul says, that's it. We're just not going to do it anymore. We're just not going to. We're not going to whine about it. Let's get our butt to work. Let's pick up and let's go. A couple other things. I believe through lots of research, I believe that when planets are going through the sixth house, they can sense that they're about to go into the seventh house. This is the public house. And you're going to see in a minute, I've changed the seventh house from just always talking about relationships and marriage. The seventh house is just as important about your public persona. So the sixth house is getting this self that was just created, put together, fixed, all put together, formed, and it's going to go out and meet the public. It's going to go out and meet the public, maybe in a whole different fashion than it ever has. So the sixth house is a little hypersensitive, and this is why it's a little bit hyper about they don't like being criticized. The Virgos don't do well with criticism. And one of the reasons is because they're so self-critical to begin with. That's why they don't need it from somebody else. But the ultimate reason is they're trying to get ready to go into the great ballroom, to meet everybody, to have your social display, to come out. And you're a social debutante, and you're meeting people in the seventh sign of Libra or the seventh house. So the sixth house is very important for several other things. It's very important for your health. It's the house that tells me about your health. Why is that? Because it makes sense. Because in the sixth house, you're taking responsibility for how the self has been put together. All right. So the health can be very much affected. As a matter of fact, without a doubt, if you've not heard me say this before, the number one sign that comes to visit me, Virgo females, without a doubt. Number one illness in all the zodiac, lower intestinal problems. These are all Virgoan traits. Okay. And it has to do with letting go, being uptight, holding on, let it go, stop it, let it go, stop it, let it go, stop it, fix it, something's wrong, fix it, getting all hyper about what needs fixed. That's what leads to illness, not being fluid. Another thing that's very important that I've picked up on the last 10 years, and is really, really true, when planets go into your sixth house, and this one, there are a lot of things in astrology that are not like clockwork. There's some things that are. This one's like clockwork. When planets go into your sixth house, almost always you learn a new job skill set. Almost always. If Uranus is involved, it usually takes place over the internet. It may be scientific. If Saturn goes in, it's usually something very practical, maybe an MBA. Maybe you're already well off, but when planets go into the sixth, it tells you the type of energy, what the person's concerned about. And also remember, you're just about to go into the seventh house. So you may be up and coming. You may be heading towards your pinnacle in your work. You may be known for how good work you do, but you might be feeling like, before I go into the seventh house and try on this new persona, maybe I'll pick up this other skill set too that will help me. So a lot of times that happens in the sixth house. So now you have seen 1 through 6. You have seen the self-expression of the first house. You've seen the second house where the self-worth gets personified. The third house where the mind gets put together. The fourth house where the emotions and the family comes together, all very critical. The fifth house where the soul starts to get challenged to express itself and gain confidence. This is what this book is all about. Each stage is slowly described. And the sixth and final house of the bottom six, the sixth house of putting it all together, perfecting, fixing. Now, as we go into the seventh house, this is one of the main reasons that influenced me to want to do this show tonight. Is I've seen so many people and there's so many books, and you have to understand it. I mean, what has astrology been for 100 years? Where's your boyfriend? Where's your boyfriend? Where's your girlfriend? Where's the guy? Where's the boy? Where's the guy? Who's my match? Who's my best match? Who's my best match? And we're just so over focused on this part of the circle because of Cosmo magazine and these others. And people want to have a partner and they want intimacy, yes. But we have put way too much focus on this house being marriage, divorce, and partnership. It is those things. It is those things. At the same time, what I'm really finding with people as planets come into the seventh, they start playing a different role with the public. You may have known me as this, but now I want you to see this. And as the planets go through the first six, they start to pick up a new persona, and it's indicated. And when planets cross your seventh house, it's usually monumental. You meet somebody, you divorce somebody, you put out a shingle, you're finally ready to go to grad school. Very big turning points happen here. So the seventh is the first house of the last six, and it is, in my opinion, no doubt, it is the Aries of the last six signs. This is the Aries of the first six signs. This is the Aries of the last six signs. Libra is the Aries of the last six signs. If you get to know Libras, they have a very strong sense of self, but it's done through the partner. Not self, it's done through the partner. First house, Aries, me. Seventh house, us. Me, us. Just me and you. This is why Libra is so obsessed with partnership. Okay? Planets in the seventh house tell us a lot about how you are as a counselor, how you are as a teacher of people, how you are as a mediator. And it tells us an awful lot about your marital status, ability to stay married, to get into one, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see the whole zodiac is just becoming more and more complex as we go. Now, when you get into the eighth house, this is the scorpionic house. So this is the deep, dark, heavy part of the chart. Notice the second house is my values. The eighth house is our values. In astrology, it's about money and other people's money, which is really pretty silly, but it's true. My money, our money. If you think I'm not kidding you, watch what happens in your partnership when planets go through your eighth house and you start divvying things up with the man and the wife and whatever is going on in the insurance and the last will and testament. So the eighth house is the higher octave of the second. So if the second, here's what it really is. If the second house is my self-worth, the eighth house is what happens to my self-worth when I'm with you. And that really says it. What happens to my self-worth when I'm with you? And I've had this tendency to let other people affect me too much, but all of a sudden one day Uranus starts going through my eighth house, and I start telling my friend, I'm not listening to you guys anymore. I will decide how I feel about myself, mom and dad. Thank you very much. I will decide how I feel about me. That's because the eighth house is being activated, and that opposition to the second house, which is my worth, when I'm with you. So it means when you see big planets like Uranus and Saturn go through the eighth house, you should see the personality start to say, look, I'm not dealing with this anymore. When I'm with you, I will decide how I feel about myself. Thank you. And we see the soul evolving and growing, getting stronger. The eighth house has another definition, which is very prevalent. It's very widespread, and it is the occult. It is dark alleys. It's dark things that happen. It is big corporations that have maybe big money held over your head. The eighth house is a heavy duty place. You don't want to mess with it. If you've got some slippery taxes going on and Saturn is about to go into your eighth house, it is strongly recommended that you get your taxes straight before Saturn goes into the eighth house, because you're going to get audited. Okay? It's got to do with money, other people's money, involvement with big corporations, and maybe you get into the seventh house and you get this nice job, and then your planets go into the eighth house, and all of a sudden bigger companies find out about you, and they come try to get you to work for them. Bigger money, bigger everything, more power. So the eighth house is a big place. It's a powerful place. It's also scary to a lot of people because it represents the occult, dark things. I know people with Saturn in the eighth house. They won't get their cards read. They won't go to an astrologer. They don't want to hear nothing about nothing. They got a block against it. They got fear about it. That's Saturn. And they don't want to hear, and that's it. I know other people with whole bunches of planets. I was doing one today of a woman with a lot of planets in the eighth house. She just dives right in. She's not afraid at all. She dives right in. She helps, as a matter of fact, she helps other people go into that deeper, darker part of yourself. One might say very carefully and conclusively that the eighth house is the shadow part of yourself. It is your Jungian shadow. Okay? Now, just so intriguing if you watch the zodiac round and round, how it's just self-reflective, etc. Now, we go into house 9. We keep getting bigger and bigger all the time. In the 9th house, this is the Sagittarian house. This is big mind, my mind, small mind, local mind, big philosophy, my government, our thoughts, my little magazine, big thoughts, my internet show, my television show, my broadcasts across the seas. Okay. So the 9th house is very important because you'll notice once again that the houses right before the cardinal houses are a big deal. Let me explain that to you. The 4 angles: 1st house, cardinal sign Aries; 4th house, cardinal sign Cancer; 7th house, cardinal sign Libra; 10th house, cardinal sign Capricorn. These 4 signs and houses are the main 4 of the zodiac because they change the tenor of the entire zodiac. So in the 9th house, the 9th house is about learning on a big scale. If the 3rd house is over here, I got a mind, I'm learning to talk, I'm learning to speak, I'm learning to communicate. The 9th house is much bigger. In astrology, it deals with long distance voyages. It deals with colleges, Harvard, Yale, Oxford. It deals with broadcast. It deals with anything on a large scale, even to the point of broadcasting out into space. It almost always tells us very clearly what's going on with your college. The third house usually shows us your elementary school. Ninth house shows when you get to college, you'll see trouble in the ninth house. You'll see trouble with the person being able to get to college or stay in college. So the ninth house has a lot to do with how do you expand. Notice how the ninth house of Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter. And Jupiter is all about expanding and growing. Well, one of the main reasons that it's doing that, it's just natural. Let me show you two reasons why. In the book, this quadrant of the zodiac, these three signs, this is the quadrant of relationships. Relationships start here, they get deepened and hopefully strengthened here. And by the time the ninth sign comes along, you're beyond personal relationships. Now it's my college versus your college. It's my visiting college student coming over from France to visit for the summer. This whole perception, this whole idea about getting bigger and broader, that's what Sagittarius does. It gets bigger, it's broader. You talk to Sagittarius, what are you reading? I don't know anything I can read. My friend was in jail for 10 years. I said, what did you do? He said, I read Sagittarian. I said, what'd you read? He said, I just read anything. And you'll hear Sagittarius in my office say, I want to travel. Well, where do you want to go? And they'll always say, I don't care. I just want to go. They just want to go. You see that with our partner, Susan, is on our show here, how she's limited now because of the gas prices, but she's been in her trailer traveling all around the United States. She sold everything and got into a trailer with her and her two dogs, her mobile home, and she's traveling. That's the Sagittarian urge to expand. Well, the other reason that you're expanding is because of this. You're about to go into the 10th house. And I told you, when you enter into the new cardinal signs is when the world changes. Job, God, self-creation, self coming together with emotions, self coming together with partner, self coming together in society. So the self is getting ready for its final quadrant, and that quadrant we call in the book the world and beyond. Capricorn being the most worldly sign there is, and Pisces being the most unworldly or beyond. So what you've got is you've got the self being born, growing up with these different pieces and parts of the self, being put together and perfected in Virgo, meeting others, growing tighter with others, going to university. Now it's coming out into the world. So we see how the fourth house was about me protecting myself with my family at home. The 10th house is about me protecting myself by having a good, solid job in the community. Now, the 10th house is very misunderstood too. In most astrology books, the 10th house talks about your job, your scene, your public, it's your job. And for most people it is. But in reality, in astrology, there's no such thing as a job. There's no such thing in a chart as a job, as a janitor, as a gem finder. The 10th house is about God. God is calling you home. Okay? That's the higher dimension of a job. Now, people with many planets in the 10th house, those planets can describe what kind of job they would like, what kind of job they want to be independent. Would they rather be behind the scenes? Do they want to be the leader? Okay, if it's Virgo there, they're very good at it, but they want to be behind the scenes. Okay, if it's Pisces there, they might want to work for a nonprofit for the underdogs. You see how you mix it all? You just keep mixing it all together. Astrology is the gooeyest occupation in the world. When you're all done, you're just mixing everything up with everything since the day you began. And you just got a big pile of stuff on your hands. And you're mixing it. Hopefully, you're mixing so it makes sense. So a 10th house planet or a 10th house transit can be definitely changes to your job. It's a very positive sign. Usually when planets go through the 10th, things happen well in your job because your planets have come home. They've come home and they're culminating. Okay? So a lot of times you get public, you get the notoriety that you have failed to enjoy to this point. So a lot of times things go really well in your job and your career. For other people, when there's like Neptune sitting there or positive powerful spiritual planets, your calling is God. And you're just not interested in your job. You're more interested in your spirit self. I'm dealing this week with a woman who has had a very successful, down to earth job, very impressive, but she's got Neptune at the top of her chart, and she's been more interested in the calling to go home. So now we're not fooling around anymore, okay, which is what I don't like to do. Neptune in the God part of your chart is about going home. You're not going home when you're going to work at McDonald's. You're going home when you're going back to God. And there's so many ways to talk about it. There's so many venues. There's so many ways. There's so many books. There's so many methods, etc. I'm not going to get on any single horse. But the 10th house can tell you a lot about is the person called towards an ashram, is a person called towards a bigger industry. Like with Chuck here. Chuck and I have been working very closely for a long time. Chuck is a major CEO leader, and he's going through tremendous change now. Now, what I'm telling him is going to happen is he's going through tremendous change now in how he wants to lead corporations, but it's very likely at the end of this process, after these planets are done with his 6 planets in Leo or whatever, he may very well feel done with it and just want to go totally spiritual. And during the meantime, he may want to start blending one with the other, as our friend Michael Singer writes about in his books. What's the name of it? He's right. The Surrender Experiment and the Untethered Soul. It's exactly right. Thank you, Chuck. So Chuck may be going through the 10th house for a while now because he's got Uranus hitting a bunch of his planets from the 10th, and he may be actually putting in tremendous focus on getting his career the way he wants it. And then he may get to the point as that planet gets more towards the 11th house where he starts to say, well, this is cool and I've done that. And maybe now I want to start shifting into my higher dimension of my spiritual years. So the 10th house is very misunderstood. It's closely aligned with the 4th house. It's a very careful place. You're worried about your reputation. You got to be careful how you're seen and what you say and what you do. So next we go into a gravely misunderstood house, the 11th house. And if you've noticed by now, these things have a name for them. These are called the angular houses. Angular, angular, angular. These are called fixed. The second one in the group, fixed, 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 fixed. The fixed houses are very, very misunderstood in astrology. I also noticed when the book was written, I couldn't believe it, but when I wrote the Scorpio chapter, I thought it would take me months to write it. It took 2 days. Then I looked on the Aquarius and I said, boy, it didn't take long at all. And I looked at the Taurus, that didn't take long, and neither did the Leo. So what I found out years later was writing about the fixed signs did not take as much because the real descriptor was the one before it. The big deal changes when the 10th house comes. The big deal changes when the first house comes, 4th and 7th, etc. So the 11th house is very simple to understand. Just let me give you what it's noted for. It's noted for very fixed things: friendships, association, groups, hopes, and wishes. Those clear-cut things. It's what it's known for. So I lived with that for a long time, thought about it, and I just started to go, after a while, I just think there's more here. Okay, so the 10th house is you put the shingle out. I'm a doctor. I've made it. I got my degree. I'm up here. I'm getting my clientele. I'm getting my patients. I'm establishing my practice. And I'm proud of myself. And I'm making a name for myself in the local papers. 10th house. After a while, that gets old and you want to try something a little more meaningful. The 11th house comes. So the fixed houses are an octave higher than the house before them. The 11th house is a higher octave of the 10th house. So instead of me being satisfied with my career as a doctor, I want to join the AMA. I want to be elected to the AMA. I want to write articles. I want to write research papers. So that's what happens in the Aquarian house, the 11th house, which is a higher dimension of the job house, because Aquarius is all about what are the ramifications of this knowledge you have? What are the higher ramifications of all this position that you've attained? We're back in the 10th house. You're just happy to have it. So the 11th house is very misunderstood. It's very underplayed. And it really has a lot to do with not hopes and wishes. It has a lot to do with hopes and wishes, big time. That's what I've learned. So when you talk to somebody, first of all, when you talk to somebody about what they wish for and what they want, almost everybody will say to you, well, I don't know. What's that? I don't. And if you push them a little bit, they'll really finally tell you what they want to do. They're just nervous about saying it. They don't want to say it. They want to declare it. They want to say it to the universe. But when you talk to people in heart, they tell you what their big wishes are. And that's when they get activated, when planets go through the 11th house. One reason why is because that's the time when you gain power by working with your fellow humans, when you start collaborating. And boy, you know your job's going to get a lot easier to do when you're working together with a group. So when we look in the zodiac, and we look over at the 5th house, you'll recall this was the house of me being creative, me going on stage, me playing trumpet, me having a child, me getting on stage. The 11th house is us. What are we doing? Look how we can create together. Look, I want to buy the world a Coke as a group. That's the 11th house. It's big time, and it is upon us now. Liza and I have been talking all day about that today, how nobody knows exactly the age of Aquarius. When does it start? We know it starts somewhere the year after 2000. Some people think 2050, but I happen to think we're on it right around now, because what are we learning? We're learning that this big Capricorn period that we just went through when everything fell apart, that how we're going to put it together is with Aquarian energy. If we're going to make it through these ages, we've just spent 15 years with Pluto and Capricorn. As Pluto goes into Aquarius, the age of Aquarius is very likely to start. And the age of Aquarius is needed because this is the sign of collaboration. Let's work together. Now, the ages are going to be for another evening because they're a whole different story. The ages go on for over 2,000 years. We backed up into the age of Pisces in the year zero. We've been going through Pisces backward for 2,000 some years. Before that was the age of Aries. We backed out of Aries into Pisces. The ages take place backwards. So it's very likely that we're upon the age of Aquarius now, especially if you start to see the behavior of people change, and the talk and the movies and the books talk about let's work together. Okay? Let's work together. Because the Pluto and Capricorn sub-age that we just went through has clearly been about the death of bureaucracies, the death of capitalism. So how are we going to get past it? Are we saying that Aquarius is the age of socialism? I don't think so, but I think there's some elements there. We certainly need a whole new way of rethinking things. So now, when we look at the 11th house, the 11th house is very telling about our friends, about the groups that we're in. It's a very positive house. I noticed that when Saturn goes through the 10th and 11th, the person usually has about 5 years of good success and notoriety. Saturn takes about 28 months per sign, so it's about 5 years for 2 signs. Now, when it leaves Aquarius and goes into Pisces, everything starts to change again dramatically. So the 11th house is very underrated, as are all the fixed houses. They're all underrated. The 2nd house, the 5th, the 8th, the 11th. And one reason is because the big deal happened on the house before them. So in the 11th house, a lot of activity with groups, a lot of travel with groups, a lot of Chuck doing his work with groups, leading with groups. And you notice, Chuck, the reason that's happening is Uranus is really in. It's in your real 11th house. So that's the reason that you're having that particular mixture for you. Now, finally, this is a very difficult one. The 12th house. The 12th house has the worst reputation in the zodiac. It's got the reputation of the personality falling apart, mad houses, being locked up, being put into jail, being behind the scenes, being sick. So it's really peculiar. And it's always really made me rub my chin hard, because you got the self, you got the stuff, you got the mind, you got the emotions, you got the creativity, you got the self putting it together, you got the partner, you got the marriage, you got the education and the job and the profession, and all of a sudden everything falls apart. all of a sudden everything falls apart. So if there's anything that I want to say that's true to you, is that the 12th house is grossly misunderstood. It is the house of the non-self, and that's where the confusion happens. It's the house of the non-self because after 11 signs and 11 houses, Aquarius can go no further, even with consulting with others, because the self has to disappear and become a non-self to merge back into the sea of Pisces and oneness. And that's where the non-self is known for, and that's why people misunderstand it and erroneously label it as the house of self-undoing. It is a house of self-undoing, but in a positive way of undoing. That's the difficulty with it. It's the house of undoing, where you're undoing the ego on purpose. I watched a woman, I interviewed her about 10 years ago, very delightful astrologer, psychic, very, very talented, super, super charming, just charmed the birds out of the trees. She had a lot of planets in the 12th house. So I don't just let things go. I study, how is it? Why is it? Why aren't you a big flop? Why aren't you in jail somewhere? That's what the books say. And what I found out, and I had assumed this, and when I talked to her, I found out it was right, and I was glad I did. What I was right about was up until the time that she started to succeed, she was really starting to fail, because you cannot take your ego with you into the 12th house. You can't do it. Can't do it. There's no place for it because it's seen for what it is. It doesn't exist. So I asked her about it, and she started to have all kind of troubles in her life. I don't remember exactly, but all kind of things were falling apart and all this. But this girl was a very smart Virgo, and she got it together, and she humbled herself, and she got her altar together, and she started to pray, and she did meditation, and she started to realize that the beginning of the 12th house is where you leave your valuables. It's where you lay your valuables down and let go. And the reason it's seen as such a negative house is because we got too many damn Westerners writing the books who see that as a loss, but it's not a loss. Talk to young Buddha, Siddhartha. Talk to the young aspirants, leaving their stuff behind, going to their quiet little ashrams, leaving their stuff behind. They're glad to get rid of it. It's what's holding them back. But here's the story. The story. The zodiac is not a picnic. The zodiac is not a little merry-go-round that we paint pretty pictures of animals on it. The zodiac is a mythological symbol and story of how the self gets shed in the 12th stage to where you become naked once again, and you become like Christ said. Until you become like a child, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. You can't bring your ego into the 12th house. So this is really difficult. If the 6th house, which I forgot to tell you, is a wonderful house of service, people that have great sense of service, just like the 12th house, people have like Padre Pio and Mother Teresa, they have tremendous sense of service to others. And if 6 is about fixing up everybody's karma through here, 12 is about fixing up everybody's karma through all 12 signs. So it's on a very broad scale. It's on a very big scale. I have a Pisces friend who was an energy medicine teacher. And she was teaching a workshop one night. This must have been, I don't know, 1986, 30 years ago or something. She was teaching. She's very delightful and she's very chipper and she's very lighthearted and she's teaching. And in the middle of teaching, she collapsed on the stage. They were concerned about her, and she was a health teacher and all this. And they got her backstage and they revived her, and she was okay. And there really was no problem like a heart attack or anything like that. What had happened is at the moment that she fell down on stage was the moment that Gaddafi's son was murdered. Same minute. Think about that. Give it a lot of thought. And she was told, and they put two and two together, and it all made sense, and they verified it with the newspapers and Reagan's forces out there killing Gaddafi and all that. So what I'm trying to tell you is she died on that stage because there's no difference between her and Gaddafi's son. And the only way you can get to such a state of universality is to have a non-self. She couldn't take her Donna with her. Her name's Donna. She couldn't take Donna with her into the 12th house. She had to, into the 12th stage, she had to leave Donna at the doorstep, at the threshold. And so that's how, and that's one of the problems with Pisces, is when things happen to others, it affects them unduly. They can't stand what's going on in Ukraine. They just can't stand it. People that are very sensitive with Neptune, they can't stand watching the news of what's going on because they don't have much of a self. Now, that's the complex part that's explained so well in the book, because the book is all about Pisces and it's all about how to be a successful Pisces. And that's one of the really good reasons that you'll want to tune in next week, because of all the Pisces I've met, Deneen Joyner, who will be our guest, is a terrific example of a very selfless Pisces. She's got enough self in her that she was able to get strong and fight and get past her own traumas and to write about it and help. But she's not selfless to the point where she just falls apart like a pile of jello. So it's a tough sign to be. And that's why the 12th sign, the 12th house, has got such a bad hold on, please. That's a good ability. That's why it's a good ability to just turn everything off, turn it back on. Anyhow, we're over the noise interruption, and I'll have time now. If you have any questions, I'll try to help you understand the 12 houses. They're like the 12 signs, but yet they're different. And I will tell you clearly that it's to your great advantage to read the book to get an understanding of that flow between all 12 of the different entities. Does it make any sense to anybody tonight? Any questions, anybody? Yeah, Erica, go ahead, dear.
Well, because unless you do like whole sign houses, everybody's houses will be overlapped by different signs. So like, for instance, my first house, starts out in Libra, but then it ends up in Scorpio.
Very good.
So how do you deal with that?
I'm going to show you. Give me one moment. Okay, I'm going to show you your chart and how the house systems really work, and you understand better. It's very confusing. Okay, in your chart, okay? In your chart, here are your planets in the signs. The signs are along here, Okay, Jupiter in Scorpio, Neptune in Libra, Moon in Leo, etc. These are the numbers of the houses. As I told you, first house is always over here, second house, third house, etc. So your planets are in a sign and in a house. Okay. Now, when you look at a house like the second house, your second house goes from the second degree of Scorpio until the third degree of Sagittarius. So the first degree of Scorpio is back in the first house. You see that? Okay. So what matters in a house is what sign is on the cusp. What sign overlaps the cusp of the house? Here you have Scorpio on your second. Here you have Pisces on your sixth. Here you have Gemini on your ninth house. So it's what sign overlaps that cusp. Okay? Now, if I were to show you another way of looking at this, you would even make it easier. I'll show you a European way. Okay, here's Europe. Here's a European way. Okay. Now, then in the European way, it's the same thing you just looked at. But see, you see the whole sign here. You see the whole sign. You see the whole sign. So we see that your second house starts around the third degree of Scorpio, and it goes to about the third or fourth degree of Sag. That's your second house. Your 11th house goes from 14 of Scorpio. You see it intersecting the sign of Scorpio to about the middle or 14th degree of Virgo. So from 14 to 14, that is your 11th house. Make sense? Now, those
Yes.
houses, those house divisions are divisions by time and space. Because when you were born, we know that the earth is tilted by 23 and a half degrees. So sometimes in the summer, the earth is tilted way towards the sun, other times it's tilted away. And that's why the house system is a trigonometrical method of coming up with equal houses. So in other words, even though this house is little, this house is big, it took the planets the same time to go through each of these houses because everything's tilted. That's the reason. That's all it means. So the zodiac has nothing to do with the houses. The planets are going through the zodiac and they're going through the houses. So if you were born and I looked up at the sun and I saw the sign of Taurus, how the rest of the zodiac is seen is through the division of those 12 houses. Other than that, I'm not going to say anymore because it's just too confusing. Does that help?
Thank you, Rick. Yes.
Yeah, well, you are welcome. Susan, yes.
Possibly to confuse matters further.
Okay.
What if you have an intersected house?
I'm not going to get into that. An intercepted house, I'll tell you what it is. I just don't believe much in it. An intercepted house, for instance, in my chart, there's no Virgo on any of the house cusps. And therefore, there's no Pisces on any of the house cusps because some of the houses are less than 30 degrees. Some are more than 30 degrees. Some theories are if you have an intercepted house, planets in that house have a harder time expressing themselves. So those are the theories. I have not experienced that in my life. I see planets in houses and they seem to be active. I think it's just another one of those little things in astrology that people pick on and go, ooh, there's an intercepted house. But I don't know. Any other questions? Some planets will go through your houses slow, some will go fast. The sun will go through in a month, Eris will go through in 120 years. The sun in 1 month, Eris in 120 years. Because it's so far away from the sun, has so far to go. But anyhow, what I wanted you to get tonight is not real confused. I wanted you to get the idea that houses have a more personal descriptor to them than what we hear. When we see houses that have to do with my self-worth and my self-worth when I'm with you. When we see the 7th house having to deal with my public persona, opposite the house of myself. When we see the 10th house of my career and 11th house of higher dimension of my career. That's what the houses are meant to teach you tonight. So again, next week, Deneen Joyner will be with us, and that will be the 19th of May. She is a shaman from Pittsburgh. She's been on the show before. She's absolutely excellent. Her topic is going to be sexual karma. Now, she's talking about many issues that she's discovered, but she's going to be talking about whether rape has been handed down through your family lineage. She's talking about molestation. She's going to be talking about trauma, abuse of all kind, and she's a real specialist in how to get past your trauma. Her book is out. We'll be advertising it next week. It's excellent story of how she did it. So I hope to goodness see you all next week. Thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
Rick.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to have you with us tonight, all you guys and all you YouTubers. Thanks, and I'll see you next week. Bye now.
Hey,
Be safe.
adios.
Be non-COVID.
Exactly.